All right, so just so we're clear, we're going to let them in at 11, and then we're going to still, I'm just going to say hello, welcome, and then we're still going to wait a couple more minutes. Is that what we're doing? Or you want to just, because, I can do it either way. Or you want to start at 11 and go with the intro? I mean, because now they're there, they're holding. We have multiple people in the waiting room, so I think their expectation is to start at 11. So we don't really, unless you want to hold it, then if we hold it, that's fine. But we can still let people in after the fact. So
we can, and we don't have to hold it. They aren't parking, right? Like in other days, they're parking.
All right. So 11 o'clock, we'll be looking right around 11 or so. We'll be looking to start the intro. And if you could, hopefully I'll hear everything. But just give me like a thumbs up, and then I will start my intro part. All right, people, stand by 1 minute.
Folks in. Put this on the phone.
Okay, welcome to the Dean Talks. Folks, we'll be getting started here in just a moment.
Right Fruit is a nonprofit entity
dedicated to identifying and strengthening innate skills as they appear along the spectrum of ways we think and learn. Our mission is to infuse mainstream learning with enhanced curriculum, customized lesson plans, and demonstrated creative systems. We aim to foster comprehensive learning, enthusiasm, and confidence for all students. The Dean Talks serves as a conduit, think tank, and intensive to discuss how to identify and support unique learning styles. All systems are go. The Dean Talks starts now.
What a familiar voice. What a familiar voice that is. Welcome to the virtual learning edition of the Dean Talks. We're going to delve into the gap that is created as we live this hybrid existence of virtual and natural worlds. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of hosts or sponsors of Ripe Fruit Foundation. This information is not intended to replace therapeutic or medical advice. Ladies and gentlemen, this session is being recorded.
Right now, I know an Associated Press and Chalkbeat survey found that Hispanic and Black students are more likely than white students to start the school online. But therein lies a huge concern about this digital divide and the long-term consequences of increasing that socioeconomic gap in student achievement. It is real, and it's really being understood now. What have we learned?
Well, we've already seen some preliminary studies this summer that show that low-income kids, as we had suspected, are likely falling farther behind, and we're going to have to do more work to close the gap. We also have recently seen some studies that show that high-income kids are actually doing even better than expected. So we really have this widening gap. It means that schools and teachers really have to be smart about understanding where kids are when they start the school year. Parents have to do as much as they can to be in touch with teachers, understand where their students are, what they can be doing at home to support their students and supplement instruction. But we also know this is going to be a multi-year process to get kids back up where they need to be. We're not going to be able to solve this in just a few weeks.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So any tips you can give parents who have their children, their students who are attending school remotely, they're doing that they're in home learning, not the in-person learning. What can you tell parents?
Well, I think really I think one of the benefits we've seen is that this is open communication between teachers and parents in a new way. And so parents should be in touch with teachers, tell them what they're seeing at home. How are their kids doing? What are they struggling with? Likewise, ask the teachers, what can I be doing to supplement and support my kids at home? And how can I be helpful to you? And really sort of do more to communicate with teachers and the principal to understand how we can get through these next few weeks and months.
Yeah, that communication more key now than ever.
Much very important advice for parents out there. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Apples here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the
to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.
All right. Well, that was nice for ABC News. And what, folks, we might assume that a virtual world would lessen the gaps, racial, socioeconomic, cognitive, but some research of online learning has shown the same trends from the tangible world picking up online. As you watch this, think about the correlations that are attempting to be drawn and see if the picture still holds for you.
I feel very stressed. This year has been super hard. There's been a lot of nights where I have cried because of the things that I didn't get to do as a senior. So I'm definitely less emotionally stable than I have been my whole high school career.
This semester, I probably get around like 4 to 5 hours of sleep. And then compared to last semester, I was getting like 10 to 11 probably.
I do remember having a couple of breakdowns. And I was texting my friends like, why am I having so many mental breakdowns? Online school is giving me more stress than regular school did.
In October, we saw that in our student in Chicago.
Okay. Are we going with another one?
That's it.
All right. So let's get into our panel. We have Swathi, who is the owner of Simple Keys, where she incorporates behavior therapy in her piano instructions. Swathi?
Hi, so I work with neurodiverse students in my music lessons, and recently we've been introducing new ways to learn, creating a more diverse learning environment, and by doing that, I hope to make learning more easier for all of them.
Okay. Nicole Fall is a Baltimore-based artist educator. As an accomplished artist, she has taught for 30 years in a variety of educational institutions as an associate professor and has also been an arts administrator. She has taught in Baltimore City and county schools. Nicole?
I'm sorry. Yes, I do. I love to collaborate with students. I work with after school programs, and we work with communities and create public art that really gives students a sense of agency and advocacy. It enhances those behavior practices that really will enhance their academic learning as well.
Okay. Jess Corinne is head of services, Learnfully, and education executive. Jess has dedicated her life to providing learning support to families using multi-sensory evidence-based curriculums. She has 20 plus years of neurodiversity experience, including 10 years as an executive with Lindemood Bell Learning Processes. Jess?
Hi there, I'm Jess Corinne. As you said, I'm head of services for Learnfully. We are on a mission to empower neurodiversity. As head of services, I oversee the administration of assessments, the implementation of instruction with fidelity, and help with consulting coaches and teachers alike to ensure learners of all needs are being met. We see learners with and without diagnoses.
Okay. And my name is Stephen King. I am your host. Some students have returned to school, but not all. As we've proven capacity for virtual learning, students are returning to the classroom. We could see an interruption to that traditional setup happen again in our lifetimes. Currently, if you take a look at Philadelphia, for example, they are trending back towards masking and possibly reinstating the virtual school environment. Jess, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we were all in a rush to provide virtual instruction. And to the credit of educators that is due, many of them didn't have time to ensure that all learners were feeling seen, heard, and were reached. And some of that really involved limited access to technology. We had learners in remote areas who were unable to access the content and curriculum. Of course, some of our learners lost focus, so we weren't able to expedite progress and maintain engagement. And they were also a little anxious, as you noted. There's an uptick in anxiety, and that stress fog that exists in the prefrontal cortex was blocking their brain's ability to truly maximize the opportunities that were presented. So a lot of learners felt lost. They felt hidden. They didn't feel as if their needs were being met, and they fall further and further behind as a result. Thankfully, as we're starting to shift towards more personalized instruction online, we're seeing a heightened level of efficacy and efficiency with progress. More learners' needs are being met. They're able to receive that differentiated nature of instruction. And so it's really important, as if we do go back to almost primarily online instruction and in this classroom cohort type community, it's really important that parents feel empowered to not just advocate for their learners, but also make sure that they have the proactive communication in place so that they know exactly what they need to address. There's a study by Understood that said 72% of parents after the pandemic are way more aware and in tune and communicative with the ecosystem that surrounds their learners. So it's important for parents to feel that they have that reciprocity of communication, and then also teaching their learners to advocate for what they need and how they learn best, whether it be online or in person.
Let me ask a question. From the perspective of the child who is now in let's say a home environment and is virtually communicating, through a screen, is there is the parent adjusting the environment for the child to learn? That's question one. Question two is, when that child is in the standard or traditional classroom environment, do they have that same flexibility? So if you can answer that, then we'll go to some other panels.
Certainly, no, and I think it's extremely important that we try to control the variables of distraction in the household. So setting them up with a clear, clean area to work where they feel comfortable. I also want to reinforce the importance of incorporating movement and sensory breaks, because us adults can relate to learners who are sitting at their desk online. They're hitting a screen burnout, they're zoning out, they're drifting, they're losing interest, and they may not even be as engaged online as it is. So it's really important not only to try to control the environment to support the learner on how they learn best, but also reinforce the importance to the learner themselves to advocate for their need to incorporate breaks, movement, whatever they need to stay engaged and feel like they're connected to the content at hand.
Okay. Do we have some other panelists that want to weigh in?
Sure. During the pandemic, I was working for a nonprofit where we provided after-school arts programming with clay, and so we would deliver kits, and then we would get online and work with the students, which was really neat. They got this hands-on experience, but we also got to see their learning environment, their home environment, and it really varied quite a bit, and there were kids, that they were basically working from their phone, which in the sense of the art class, that was fine. They just needed to be able to see us. But it didn't seem, that this idea of having, like, making an environment for your child to learn, it didn't seem like in some cases, there just wasn't the resources to do that. And like kids would be in their bedroom on their bed, and, and so it was very interesting to see the differences in the environments, because we saw the opposite too. We saw parents involved and kids working in a nice, clean table. And, so we got to see the gamut, including a parent coming in and their child was on the phone taking the clay class, and she started screaming at him because clay is messy. And she didn't realize he was on the phone. She thought he was just in his room making this mess, and she started screaming at him. So it has been really interesting. It has been really educational from the teacher standpoint to see the children's home environments.
That is that point. I think we should spend a little time there. So we have this new virtual experience where it's like, okay, we'll provide the laptops or the communication devices for the kids to virtually have access to the classroom. And that virtual experience includes the home environment. And I think people forget about that. I've seen and heard stories of parents that, walk past while the child is in class, they walk through the background, naked or whatever. So there's just a whole adjustment that needs to go on when the virtual environment is present. We have also seen where there are activities going on behind the child that have nothing to do with learning. And maybe a third party needs to get involved, like law enforcement. So there's just it really brings to mind kind of the Orwellian theory of 1984, which is, you're being observed and you need to adjust your life for being observed to that point, because, even though we have a lot of cameras in our homes, and, a lot of folks don't even think that they have cameras in their homes, when on your phone, you have 2 cameras, your laptop is another camera, your iPad is another camera. So by the time you figure all that out, you've got 6 or 7 cameras in your home that may not be blatant, like a Ring or any of that stuff. But we need to take into consideration that there is a new level of penetration when it comes to our private space. And I think the online environment brought that forward.
Let me jump in there on that, a couple of notes. So I would just say that I think the observation that's happening is no longer, yeah, of course, people are watching, they're in your home, your teachers are in your home, other students, families are in your home. But the bigger observation is that after 5 years or after a year of teaching that way, the student either grasped the lesson or they didn't, and they're out in the world either not having grasped whatever it is, the concept is, and sometimes it's reading in something very core or not. So the observation is now happening on such a larger level, and such as like dropout rates and literacy rates. I don't want people kind of to worry so much about that. And I feel like sometimes there's a trend towards that. I wanted to pick on the note that Nicole said, though, about I want to challenge, and even the video said, with the high income, they benefited from virtual learning and low income didn't so much. I want us to challenge older narratives that say poverty is conducive with, we don't have the resources, as opposed to somehow there's this attitude that maybe poverty education is a luxury for the wealthy, as opposed to like, this is what you're doing, this is the only important thing that you're doing, student, is something that as an attitude and as a culture, we've kind of said is reserved for people who have wealth. So that it's like, what do we do with this extra funding that may be coming through tax time? So just challenging norms, not too sad.
Well, let's continue down that. if we're looking at, for example, income, and we're looking at just we'll just paint a quick scenario of a public school environment. So the school would provide the computer, which would give the connectivity to the classroom. So the question becomes, does this level the playing field? Does this allow, whether you are, whether your income level is high, whether your income level is low, at a certain point, does the school, just by the nature of the device and the laptop that's provided, does that level the playing field and allow that, whether again using income, it gets the kids to the classroom, but then there's some other things that come up, which is maybe the school breakfast program, which they're not getting, for example, which they were getting when they were going to a regular school. And I remember in school when they were like, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So I think that perhaps we have leveled somewhat, maybe virtually has leveled somewhat, but how does that flow through into the child's actual, whether their stomach is full, whether their stomach is growling, whether they're distracted, whether there are other people are coming in and out. So what do you think about that, Ebony? I mean, what are we making progress? Is the virtual classroom here to stay? I guess, in some form or fashion.
It's a good question. I mean, Baltimore City students had laptops, I think, but then homework went away. And so it's this balance, but I think there's progress. I see Nicole trying to come in. She has a much more frontlines experience.
I think Jess raised her hand first.
Thank you. I just wanted to, and I'll be quick, but I just wanted to note that we live in just a middle-class neighborhood, and we go to public school, and meals were provided the entire time. Devices were provided the entire time. There continues to be parent education around, the importance of executive functioning skills and social emotional learning and how they can nurture their learners' growth. So I think I just hesitate in making generalizations about public schools is all I'm saying, because I think at least in this local area, I know it's not a generalization across the board, but there are some pockets that have struck a balance between distance learning, and we continue to have distance learning throughout the school year, but they've done such a brilliant job in rolling it out.
Okay, let me jump in real quick, Nicole. So, just real quick. So what you're saying is in the virtual environment, meals were provided?
Absolutely, and we actually have a distance learning day still every 3 weeks, and they continue to provide 2 meals and a snack.
All right, so is that like a Meals on Wheels type thing?
The school bus delivers it. Go Atlanta. The school bus delivers it, to every kid, regardless of income. So no matter where you fall, you get the 2 meals and a snack on distance learning days.
This is why these conversations are important to keep me, I haven't been to school and I don't know when. I'm like, well, everything's virtual, so how are they going to eat, So,
but it might be an anomaly. I don't have experience outside of the Georgia area, so.
Well, that's still a great example, because this does show the progression and the fact that the virtual people are also taking into consideration that these kids need to eat, and that's being provided for, at least in Atlanta. Let's go to Nicole.
So in Baltimore, the schools would have their cafeterias, and kids could come who lived in the neighborhood and pick up the meals. Now, as far as online education, it really varied quite a bit, because in Baltimore City, it was a Comcast that was saying that they were giving free Wi-Fi. But it wasn't strong enough if you had more than one student being on there during school. The other thing that I heard anecdotally from teachers and students was that it was free for 3 months and then they had to pay for it. And so that would become an issue as well. I think we have a long way to go before you have equity in education. And I think there's a lot of frustration with the way, whether these laptops function. I know when I was teaching pre-COVID at Sparrows Point High School, everyone had a computer, and I can't tell you how often they were going to the technician with computer problems. So, and that was a range of working class to middle class and lower income students. So it was a broad range of students at the school.
Okay.
So
this is why communication is so important when it comes to these topics, because basically what we're saying is, just as the in-school environment is different, that difference also can reflect virtually as well. And it's important for us to be as comprehensive as possible when addressing these virtual concerns. Let's talk about online learning.
I think Swathi was going to say something.
Oh, did you, Swathi? Okay.
I was going to mention that even Montgomery County Public Schools did offer meals at no charge for some of its students. I think they are doing it kind of like a yearly basis. I'm not too sure about the whole process, but I do know this school year they did try to provide meals, whether it's breakfast, lunch, some snacks and stuff to its students.
Okay, excellent. So it seems to be that there is a consistency with some of the I guess more dynamic needs of these children to ensure that they are not, as much as possible anyway, they're hungry while they're in class. And I do know that was one of the things back when I was going to schools, make sure that these, that we had something to eat. So moving to online learning, right now students have access to everything from online-based programs put out by technology companies to Ivy League open education efforts. One unaddressed concern is the online learning course dropout rate. How many online courses, example would be Coursera or Udemy, have you in the audience started and not completed? Just put a number in the chat. And as they're doing that, why don't we hear from our panel? And let's go to Nicole to lead this conversation.
I'm very interested in those kinds of learning environments, and I've participated in quite a few of them. And what seems to be evolving and what is absolutely critical is this real contact with whoever's offering the course, or this real contact. They're hiring staff now so that you have actual one-to-one contact at some point in this online course. When it's just left to, you're taking a class and you have no actual interaction with someone, even online, that there tends to be this loss of interest and motivation, and then it stops. I know that these weight loss groups are doing that now, where they have counselors assigned, so you interact with them. I did take an online course through the Ivy League system, and the way that worked really well was that there were a bunch of us that formed a group, and so we would we would meet once a month and talk about the reading, and that's how we got through the course. So it seems to be that component of personal one-to-one interaction is the key to making those classes work for people.
Okay, and to follow up with that, Swathi?
Yeah, I've taken some online courses too, and some I've dropped. I did finish my degree online, so I think there was that motivation of completing the degree that brought me to finishing it. But the idea that Nicole said about, having that one-to-one connection or some kind of group, it comes down to accountability. When we're self-pacing or doing an online course and there's no check-ins or there's nothing to keep yourself accountable, it is very easy to lose that motivation, especially in an online format. And I personally was also approached by a couple of other music teachers who were creating online courses, and they've told me to create them too, but seeing how already my virtual classes are running and so many of the kids, it's hard enough even with the teacher on the screen in front of you to keep their attention. I can only imagine how difficult it is for kids to independently go online and learn by themselves, not have too many resources to ask a question or someone to check in with or any kind of goals to meet. So it does make it very difficult to learn from. Although I do think that for some people it might be helpful, but some amount of accountability is still very important, even if it is your preferred route of learning.
Okay, brings up something interesting, and I'm going to ask Ebony Kinney a question. So the accountability piece has come up a couple of times now, and I know that you have some experience with accountability sessions. Can we, even though we're not directly saying that there's an accountability session on the side of perhaps the learner and teacher, via the screen. Can you spend a little bit of time, Ebony, talking about just the theory of an accountability session?
Sure. And, it's not necessarily the new concept of accountability. In other words, they haven't done anything new to it, but they've grouped a few together. So some, they could also be considered productivity tools. So they'll take something called body doubling, which just means you're working with someone else. And then they took Pomodoro technique, which means you're using an egg timer to time box what it is you're doing, and put them together. And I go to several of these sessions a week sometimes, depending on the task, because they're called FocusMate. FocusMate is a website. And you go there, you sign up for the session, 25 minutes or 50 minutes. It's in a time box. You say what you plan to do during that session. You work quietly with your cameras on. And then in the end, you say whether you got it executed, what you have left to do. And it creates a level of accountability, but also just that partnership, because some of these things that we want to do, the reward is so far out, it's hard to make it an immediate motivation. And you maybe want to go for the next job at your company or something like that. And it's so far out. And if you need to create an immediate sort of reward. And in that sense, it does that. And there's a few others I can share later in the chat, or if you feel free to reach out to us.
Okay, so Swati mentioned the same thing. She says, okay, online, I wanted to get my degree. So that was my motivation. She got closer to that goal, and that kept her going. So again, these are things that we need to really, make sure that we focus on when it comes to these types of conversations. Is what is that online environment look like for the child? And do you literally close the door, leave the child in a room, for example? Well, let's say a learner. Let's not say just children, in a room with the instructor on the other side, or is it also part of the parent or guardian to be in there and make sure that they're that the learner is alert? Because there is that kind of lack of there's one thing when the teacher's like staring at you like, look, pay attention, as opposed to being safely, kind of behind your screen. You are listening to the Dean Talk. My name is Stephen King. We have a panel of experts here. This is a Ripe Fruit Foundation production and also a Creative Kid podcast production. So we will put virtual learning links in the chat later on in the show as we continue. And let's continue. Back in the mid-1950s, when schools were desegregated, the justification was to equalize resources. In the years since, there was a range in how that looked. That has caused some to vacillate on whether or not desegregation was a good thing. In the conversation about virtual learning and the reliance on out-of-school resources, where can we find balance? Let's go to Jess.
Sure thing. I mean, I have so many thoughts on this matter, so I'll try to keep it concise and to the point. But essentially, I mean, I think just back to the last two questions at hand, the onus falls on a triage of parties, right? So we can't put entirely it on the parents to shape the child's trajectory, the educator or the child themselves. And I think that it's really leading to many families needing to turn to supplemental resources. And because we're unable, as teachers, parents, and learners alike, unable to balance all that's coming at us. So a lot of families have chosen to stay virtual or even homeschool. There's quite a huge uptick in homeschooling throughout the country, but particularly with Black and Latinx populations. And I think a piece of that is because they feel like they can help shape, that I can't speak for them, but they can help shape their trajectory. And so we need to move from equality to justice, right? So executive functioning, literacy, math, and executive functioning are all human rights, and they need to be explicitly taught. And so sometimes it's hard to do that online unless you have, like Nicole said, a personal relationship and rapport, or like Swati said, ownership and accountability. And so without that explicit instruction, it's hard to hold the learners, the parents, the teachers accountable to online learning as a whole, regardless of the population. There's been a huge increase in depression and anxiety, which echoes the need for motivation, but also means that learners might not have the bandwidth to be motivated. And so they require more social emotional support, counseling, some metacognitive support to learn how they learn best, and find some of those coping regulatory mechanisms that allow them to access education in any format, let alone virtually. So I'm not sure if that exactly answered the question, but I wanted to make sure we know that explicit instruction is key, and also that we need to balance the need for academic growth with social emotional health.
Okay. I want to ask again, when it comes to this is from a teacher perspective, were there did anything stand out in particular with what you observed on the other end of that screen that maybe caused you to have to call a household and try to correct some behavior? Do you have any stories, any experiences of how the diversity of learning manifested when it comes to it doesn't matter really what the color or ethnicity is? That did you see that this was really working? And I say that because your school is primarily virtual. So what insight have you seen into those homes that that you can use to give us some techniques or tactics or things to expect?
Sure. So Learnfully is a personalized platform that provides differentiated instruction both online and in person, but 80% of our learners, as you noted, are virtual. We do provide individualized and small group support. So I'll let Nicole speak on classroom. But so it's important to note, I do also want to say that behavior, I hope we all agree, is symptomatic. So if I did see behavior in a small group setting or even one-on-one, that was cause for me to dig a little deeper and find out the why behind it. And usually the why is that they're not engaged. We weren't able to incorporate interests. We didn't dive deeper into their motivation and the relationship we had. So because we're small, I know we're speaking more on a grand global scale. Because we're small, we actually have quite a bit of reciprocity, engagement, and we're able to track results in terms of efficacy thereof. So we do see behaviors. We see some elopement, which means learners leave the screen. That happens once in a while, but it's generally because of something that's causing them to react that way. And so trying to work as a team collectively and collaborate with the entire team, educators, counselors, parents, the learner as well, if they're old enough, to really get to the bottom of why they're not able to engage, whether it be a neurodivergence, a learning difference, an attentional disorder, if you will. We need to get to the bottom of it because it's, again, a human right to have access to information in the way that they deserve for it to be delivered.
Okay. I wanted to quickly make mention of the chat. So what we kind of discovered is, I know Ebony said that you went through 12 online experiences, I guess, that you didn't complete, and another person in the chat said that they went through one. So this is a nod to the discipline that it takes to engage in the virtual world. And then Jess just mentioned that we had learners who were just like, okay, I'm going to walk away from the screen, maybe we'll get a donut or whatever they're doing, and that is certainly not behavior that would happen in the traditional classroom setting. So now my question to you, Jess, is when you saw that, what did you do to correct it?
Certainly. Well, you give it a little time because honestly, you do need to give, considering the unprecedented times we're experiencing, we need to ensure that there's not something that's causing it, right? Like I said. So you give them a little time and then you have to loop in other accountable parties, right? And that's, I think it's really important though to maintain that relationship with the parent and the caregiver so that you can have transparent, proactive communication with reciprocity. That give and take, that discourse is so important because if the learner elopes, you need to speak to the greater community as to what we can do to solve it and why they eloped in the first place. And then hopefully to counteract that. When you're teaching in a whole classroom setting, it of course is extremely challenging to loop that learner back in if they elope. But making note of it, giving them some space and time. Maybe they just needed a movement break. Maybe they just needed something that was overstimulating them sensory wise to just decompress and find reprieve. And then reaching out to their caregiver to problem solve, coming up with a system, speaking with the learner directly, giving them some voice to the whole process and hearing directly from them as to what they think might help support their learning and really change their trajectory as a whole is key in the process. So engaging all parties in the conversation, even if it has to happen after that lesson itself, I think is imperative to the success of all parties on the team.
All right, excellent. Nicole.
There's so many things that come to mind. And some things are quite, I might say, are quite controversial. One thing is that I've noticed in some school systems is the authoritarian approach to teaching. And, you talk about the school to prison pipeline. And one of the things that I've noticed teaching in a school that had a lot of challenges was the incredible authoritarian approach to managing a classroom. So you have students who are used to being very rigorously having their movements very scheduled and dealt with in a very authoritarian way. Everybody line up outside the classroom. So-and-so doesn't seem to be quite ready to come into class, and this kind of thing. And then having behavior specialists who are big guys who come in when there's a problem. And the ones I've worked with are very gentle. They're like, come on, we got to leave the room, that kind of thing. So then you switch over to everyone being at home, and there's no authoritarian structure there. They're not in a classroom. They're not going to be yelled at by the teacher. And so, yes, there's a bigger challenge there, and that should not be a surprise. And I think that this kind of authoritarian structure happens more in a school that has a lower socioeconomic level of students, and that needs to be addressed for sure. Another topic completely, I was working for 3 summers with a group, high school students were youth workers. They were paid by the city, and we would work on these mosaic mural projects. And we had a student, we'll say Brian, was very attentive, very well dressed, came to every single class, and he committed suicide at the end of the summer. And there is nothing that we could have foreseen there. He had attentive parents. He was well taken care of, obviously. He was very involved, and we were all devastated, of course. And it really makes you see that, it's not going to be evident, and sometimes. And so the next summer, all of us, we were engaged with these 18 new students that we had. And we were like, if you're feeling some kind of way, please come and see us. And we were just very much oriented to even paying closer attention to the students.
It's interesting. Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in here. So we are now talking about a traumatic experience, and traumatic experiences, while they are not, especially that type of traumatic experience where you have a suicide. Normally, what would happen in a situation like that is the school would bring in outside resources for the student body, which is all marshaled in a physical building. So you could literally go to the gym and have a trauma specialist there to say, here's what happened, let's talk, and begin to weed out people who need some more additional, counseling or care, which may go to the counselor's office or what have you. And yet the experience that you just brought up was that similar situation occurred, but now the classroom environment is virtual. So how does the system adjust for that? Does the system just say, oh, well, it happened, they're at home, so that means that their parents are there or their guardians are there or their support structure is there, so the need for us to be involved is not as great? Or does it become a logistics thing, which is, how do we get them to it's definitely one thing to say, sit in this auditorium and listen to grief counsel. It's another thing to say, sit on your computer at home and listen to grief counsel. Very interesting dynamic that you just brought up. And I think that once again, what we're doing at this point is just providing food for thought as this conversation continues to evolve. And yep, go ahead.
So what Nicole and Jess both were saying, it reminded me of a conversation I had during my therapy job times. The parent told me, and we were just talking, the parent told me, it takes a whole community to raise my boy. And I think that really relates to all learners and students. It's not just one person raising that student or that child. We have teachers, educators, there's counselors, there's anyone else that they have in their life, caregivers, parents, guardians. And a lot of, with the virtual learning, that community has kind of gotten a little bit slower with the teachers and parents taking on more roles. And that does reach out to, with how much access they're getting to these resources and who they're getting it from. In a school setting, when I was working as a therapist, I was assigned to one kid. There's a teacher, there's an assistant teacher, but in a virtual learner, me and maybe a group of students who are learning, I am taking on the role of both the assistant, the therapist, all of that, and it comes down to how much are we observing all of these behaviors. So really recognizing that, yes, the community in a virtual setting has shortened, so it does put on a lot of pressure and stress for people around the learner to really pick up and see what are these behaviors and where are they stemming from and why.
Okay, so this brings up a question to me, which is I am parent A. I'm in, let's say I'm a single parent and I've got a kid and my kid is learning and we have an issue that requires me to, seek some help, seek some counseling. Is there an entity out there outside of the traditional school, like my school district, that I have resources to counselors there, I guess. But where would someone, and I know I'm just throwing this out, but that's what I do. Where would a parent like me, single parent that's now faced with this crisis situation, where would I go in this virtual environment to get some of that assistance? And this is just for anyone in the panel to jump in.
There are some reduced price services now for learners of a certain age, so like 17 and under, minors, to receive counseling and therapy virtually. And we're talking relatively low, so like $25 an hour. And I can pull those resources and share it with you afterwards, but I know I've had to seek it out I have 4 children and 2 of whom are neurodivergent. I've had to seek it out personally as a teacher mom myself. So I know they exist. I don't have those names off the top of my head.
Okay. And again, I just threw that out there hypothetically. So you are saying that those resources do exist. Maybe with a Google search, you can get some of that, some of those resources at your fingertips.
Yeah,
Anybody
but
else?
it also means that you have the wherewithal to know they need the support, or that the school has flagged you that they need the support. So also, I think caregiver and education around the need for counseling and therapy in some instances is key.
Is there a stigma associated with counseling? And if so, are there talking points that can be deployed against that stigma?
Sorry, was that for me? I saw Nicole's hand go up, so I'm just going to let her answer it.
Yeah, Nicole, that's fine. Absolutely.
I actually wasn't raising my hand about that, but
Okay.
I think that there's a lot more use of counseling and that other kinds of interventions now, so that there isn't as much stigma as there used to be. And also the idea, when I was in school, there was no such thing as being neurodivergent or having learning disabilities. It just, nobody looked at it from that framework. And so now that I think that we do, and students are coming up with, oh, this person has ADHD and these are the accommodations they need, I think the parents and the larger community don't feel like there's as much stigma to that as there would have been. I think that's been changing. And I would like to say that I know that in Baltimore County, if your child gets picked up by the police, they do offer counseling to the families. And so I think that there's that structure. I haven't heard that there's that in Baltimore City. And too bad it would have to get to this point where your kid has to be picked up by the police to get that kind of help. But it'd be interesting to really research that and see what kinds of things are available.
Just on the stigma note really quick, I do want to mention that a lot of schools are now implementing wide-scale social emotional programming within the curriculum of each classroom, which is absolutely destigmatizing some of the need for counseling, for growth mindset support, for motivational support, executive functioning support, coping mechanisms, things like that.
Okay. quick note on law enforcement. There is I work with a board at Florida State University. I'm on an advisory board, and we are the Institute for Justice Reform and Development. And what we're doing is literally looking at how much of the space that law enforcement responds to is criminal activity versus, a mental kind of situation that's going on, and making these officers sensitive to that, because we don't have that same monolithic infrastructure of sanitariums that we had back in the 50s and the 40s. Now the only thing people know how to do is put everybody in jail. So that is a super sensitive topic. Is where does, if we just using terms, where does neurodiversity stop in someone who maybe maybe you have someone who has Tourette's, and they're in the they can't get in their house or whatever it is for whatever reason, and they're screaming or manifesting. A neighbor calls the police get there, all they hear is some loud outcries. They think that it's being directed towards them, so they put them in jail. That leans towards this new sensitivity that's being deployed against what we call the stigma, and how that does reflect in law enforcement. That's a whole separate conversation. So we're not going to go down that particular rabbit hole right now. But I did want to bring it up because we are stimulating thought here as we continue with the Dean Talks. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? If not, we are moving along. Going once, going twice. All right, here we go. Let's talk about movement in the teaching field. With the increase of YouTube-based lessons like Khan Academy and Learnfully and Brain Pop, Ebony, unpack some of that for us.
Okay, so I'll just say that there is this increase in lessons that have been sort of packaged, either lessons or very modular ways of receiving information in a video or in some sort of interactive way that travels well on YouTube. Khan Academy made waves when they came out sort of with their approach, which was just, I think they individualized people understanding the concepts, but they really broke down math lessons and such. So that's what I used to work actually for Houghton Mifflin and as a tester, and we would do these packaged lessons. And even then, this feels even, it feels like we progressed a lot from that place, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And even that during a lesson, stopping and checking in live with someone, not just the sort of answer this quiz question, means that we're moving in this way that people are able to self-guide through the lesson. But I hope I answered that question.
Okay. So we're also seeing this teacher shortage. There's a burnout rate associated with that. That, of course, was exacerbated by the pandemic. What will education look like in the coming years? Let's lead this with Swati.
Yeah, definitely. There has been an increase in teacher burnout. I think earlier this year, there's been about 55% of teachers saying that they're considering, changing careers or dropping out or something. And the burnout has gradually increased since the pandemic has started. And it does come down to, like I mentioned before, teachers taking on more of a role than just teaching now. They are required to, help with any students who have anxiety. They don't have the assistant, like in a classroom setting, they have to kind of address it on the spot or something, or with a caregiver after. They have to take on roles that are going beyond just teaching, and it takes up more time than just spending time in a school or a classroom. They're working kind of 24/7 to address what kind of learning a student needs, what's working, what's not working, trying to come up with curriculums, changing them, fitting them to different learning styles, virtual settings. And this does affect the stress level of a teacher, just as much as it's affecting. We saw the video earlier today with the students saying, why are virtual online classes so much more stressful than being in a classroom? And it's affecting all the people involved. And, personally, I've also started recently a YouTube channel for my music classes, but I always try to end it with saying that it does not replace a lesson. Because YouTube, I see it more of, or YouTube or any of these other online based lessons, or more of like an extra resource. It's something to refer to maybe when you're working on some homework or you're practicing and you're not having access to your teacher right away. And you want to pick up something, maybe an extra, you're curious to learn something. These are those extra resources, and I don't think they should or necessarily will ever really replace a older model of teaching with a teacher in a classroom setting, although education might look different, and I think should look different in the coming years, and look different in the sense that maybe there's more diversity in how the teaching strategies are approaching different types of learners. That can change, and that's not just one way. I think with what YouTube has helped with that is it shows different ways to learn math. And by scrolling, students are able to find that video that helps them. And so hopefully teachers can incorporate that in a classroom setting. It does increase their work, yes, but I think that with a combination of all these resources, we can come to an education system that looks more diverse and inclusive for all learners.
Okay. That was very, very well laid out. And now what we are doing, we're approaching the, it's almost been an hour. It almost seems like 10 minutes because of this. This conversation has just, been kind of a rapid fire. So what we would like to do now is let's see what it is that Ebony Kinney has to say as she kind of reviews her notes on this Dean session. Ebony?
Many of us have kind of been here from the beginning of the session, many of the guests that I see, but I want you to put those things, those poignant points really stood out to you in the chat, just so that for posterity, and so that we can kind of check in where we heard the same things. But we talked through virtual learning and some of the challenges there and some of the things that we're up against, getting better at. And there might be focus issues with multiple levels of stimuli happening. And so creating the type of environment where if a student chooses, they can maybe go with the headphones, they can go silent. But also that working with other people and having some accountability structures are really positive for them. We talked about having some cognitive, mind breaks and also physical breaks, getting up, getting away, changing your viewpoint. We talked about resources and poverty. We had quite a spirited conversation around that. And resources is a breakfast conversation is what I wrote down as well, right? Like we're talking about what the kid ate and, who's got their bag. There's some consistency happening across classes, incomes, education levels. There's just some progress, consistency happening and some progress. So each one teach one, I guess, with that. We talked about accountability and online learning, that there is this opportunity to create courses, but even as we go out and create courses, how can we, take into account some of the challenges that are out there? Sometimes people just prefer it, and that's reason enough to continue down the road. That there's been an uptick in homeschooling, specifically in BIPOC populations, was interesting to me. That there are in sort of this, people are expanding into teachers' classrooms, environments are expanding more into math and executive functioning. And I think the word that was used was, I have it later in the notes, but there was like, a growth mindset, which I love the wording of that. And I love that it's being incorporated into everyday lessons. That was very positive to hear. That unfortunately there was an increase in depression and motivation during virtual learning, but that there is metacognitive support, there's social emotional health, and all of that becomes a part of the learning. I have the quote, behavior is symptomatic. That's what's the why behind it? What is the reason? Why is this happening? And kind of this investigation into it. We learned some new words like elopement. That was it for me. Also, the authoritarian approach was very poignant to me. I think I even got a little bit eye-watery because just looking at the approaches and seeing if it works and giving students this sort of choice and autonomy around engaging actually empowers them for maybe something later in life. Maybe we look at it, but especially not that we're just being authoritative and don't have the sensitivity to know when a student is overwhelmed. And unfortunately, in the cases where they're overwhelmed to the point that they don't feel they have resources anyone to talk to. Grief counseling at home is quite a concept, just, accountability for grief counseling. And sometimes people aren't even in school when they need, that level of accountability, but that's a whole other level. Maybe it takes another road, but it's something for us to think about when we're talking about students and little learners. It takes a whole community, social emotional programming. If the police pick up your child, your family gets counseling, which I love it. It means that people are thinking progressively. And that maybe you think of web lessons and YouTube lessons as extra resources and ways to supplement. So a lot of great notes there. Feel free to put any others in the chat. I'll see how folks.
Okay. Yeah, we do have and as a matter of fact, Nicole, you just put a note in the chat. So if you would just review that note for us that you just posted.
I just wanted to say that what I've noticed time and again is that this online learning environment should really be seen as its own medium, as opposed to, okay, now we're teaching online and just moving the same techniques and strategies just to this other medium, which really has its own thing. And one example of that is we had a group called Boardroom Chess, and they had, and so it was during the summer, and they teach kids how to play chess, and they play against each other and all that. And so they took advantage of having Zoom to bring Robert Katende, a chess champion from Uganda, to coach them. And so he could do that on Zoom. And he had trained a female chess champion, and that's a movie. It was made into a movie called Queen of Katwe. And so the kids watched the film, and they got to meet with him again and ask him questions. So I think there's a lot that hasn't been looked at in terms of how, here is this unusual medium. It has its own qualities, and how can you maximize that? And how can you maximize teaching and learning through that medium, as opposed to just transferring traditional teaching to that medium?
I won't go on a tangent, I promise, but I just want to echo everything you said, and the intricacies and complexities of virtual instruction and how important it is if possible. Of course, I know sometimes it's not, to incorporate interests to fully engage learners so they can find their potential, they can find their why, they can see what makes them tick. And sprinkling those interests then leads to a stronger level of connectivity and rapport, and then thus those results that then feed into their feelings of success and motivation. So glad you brought that up. It's well put.
Okay, so we're gonna take this opportunity to ask each one of our panelists to tell what they have going on and their contact information. And let's keep it brief. Nicole?
Sure. I just wanted to share screen for very briefly with this project. This is Brooklyn O'Malley Boys and Girls Club. It's in Brooklyn, the neighborhood in Baltimore. It tends to be quite lower income. We worked, and I'm sorry, I have to make this viewable. Okay.
We can see it.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to be able to switch. Okay. And so we worked with the kids for a couple of years, actually, doing art classes with them. And then we used their drawings, my husband and I, under Fall Conroy Project, we used their drawings to cut out these metal versions of their drawings and form it into an entire mural. And so we just got that up this past week, and the kids have come outside and pointed out what they worked on and everything. And so it's been really fun. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, and as far as contact information goes, Nicole, I see you have Facebook, Instagram, and you are at Mind Art Power NF.
Yes.
And your email is mindoutpower@gmail.com.
Yes, thank you, Stephen.
Okay. Jess, we know that you are at Learnfully.
I'm at Learnfully, so you can go to learnfully.com. All of our socials are hello Learnfully. We have a family support Facebook group for families of those with learning differences. It truly is just, let me get this right, family support for learning differences. So feel free to join our Facebook group for a ton of really useful resources. We also have been selected to be part of the LEGO Foundation Play for All Accelerator program. And we are on cloud 9 because I am catching a flight to Denmark tomorrow. And so we are putting together an enrichment, interest, play, fun-based program that can be implemented online as part of these efforts. And we're just so excited about it. Also, we have events on our website. Feel free to just browse our website. We have a ton of content. And if you are interested in a future event, there's an event page on the website as well.
Okay. And Swati.
I think we have a pretty exciting year. We're starting group classes. We got a recital coming up, and lots of fun stuff going on for students to increase practice and having fun learning. And my Instagram and Facebook is at simplekeysmd, and my email is simplekeysmd@gmail.com.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to remind everyone that our next month's session is music, math, and patterns. And that is going to be the session where I'm going to reveal how music traumatized me. Yep, that's right. I know no one's ever heard that before, and I keep saying the same thing over and over again. So next month's session is where I will reveal how music has traumatized your host, Stephen King. You've been listening to the Dean Talk. You can get more information by visiting ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org. And we will let Ebony Kinney close out this session. Ebony?
Okay. Once again, such a great session. I hope that everyone got a lot out of it. I certainly did. If you attended, tell a friend. If you're a panelist, please come back and join us. A few folks are on here for other sessions coming up. Our next session is music, math, and patterns. That'll be really exciting. So thanks for joining. Please, let's continue the conversation online. And I look forward to seeing you next month.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.